back in those days, and this is back in the last century, they didn't heat the church after Sunday evening service, turned the heat back. Baptistry was left off. It was cold. It wasn't quite like going down to the creek and breaking the ice, but it wasn't far from it. So there's more. I'll tell you more about that in just a minute, because it weaves into what I want to share with you today. Actually, when Barry asked me about preaching, I noticed he intentionally avoided one topic. I'm pretty sure he had no intention of even bringing that up to me. And Kurt didn't say it either, but I don't hold it against you, Barry. Okay? You'll see there's no guitar, and Kurt did not ask me to play and sing this morning. Barry did not ask me to play and sing this morning. I don't know why, but you don't get to hear me play and sing. And you can thank Barry for that later. I think the best that Art and Kurt could do wouldn't be enough to cover me up. So you can thank him for that. But I want to talk about those who've gone before this morning. We're going to go to Hebrews chapter 12. If you've got your Bibles, you can go ahead and flip over there. But I mentioned Kurt. The irony is that there was a time when I asked Kurt to fill in the pulpit for me when I wouldn't be preaching. And now I'm being asked to fill in the pulpit for Kurt. Now that was probably, let's see, my goodness. I was way back in the 90s. I really don't remember that far back. Some of you weren't even here. But, Kurt has learned and grown and does a fantastic job. But, I can look back now and say, I'm really pleased with having a piece, a part in that young man's life. And I think about the Meg's church. I know a lot about it because at one point when I was working on my master's degree, I wrote a history of the church. So I can kind of look back and see over the years how people who have gone before have influenced the people who are coming. And you can see it just by looking around here today. Think of the people who have gone before, the last generation or 2 generations ago, or 3 generations ago. Get any farther back than that, none of us remember. Some of us don't even remember back 2 generations. But the men and women who have gone before, who have been faithful and who have done God's work in this community, are the reason this church is here. Christianity in America is kind of facing a challenge these days, but it's not the only challenge Christians have faced in America. If you look back, I'm into history, so if you look back over the history of the church in America, the church has faced many challenges, and men and women have stood up and been faithful to God and been used by God in many, many different ways. You can take this all the way back to the book of Acts if you want to. And really, we could spend all day here if you'd like to. Just let me know. I can get into a lot of stuff. But I just got to look from Deb that said, nope, we're not going there. So, okay, I'll go back to Hebrews 12 in just a minute. But just thinking of the men and women who over the generations and the centuries have been influential in making and passing on God's truth. And if you look in the book of Hebrews, just before chapter 12 comes chapter 11. Chapter 11 mentions, I think it's about 18 men and women who are, sometimes it's referred to as God's Hall of Fame. These are men and women who are pointed out and said, these people were faithful. These people were people that God used in great ways. The interesting part of all that is, none of those people were great people before God used them. Sometimes they're called champions of the faith. Those champions of the faith became champions after God used them. It wasn't like God said, hey, it wasn't like the NFL draft or the NBA draft or anything like that. There's a good player, let's get him on our team. No, it's God who said, there's a person who will be obedient to me. I will use them. All the way back to Abraham. And that's how God works. So I want to read the first 3 verses of Hebrews chapter 12. I'm going to be sort of like Kurt. I'd like to go all the way through verse 17, but we're just going to glean some things out of that. We're not going to mine it deep like Kurt does sometimes. In this case, we're just going to pull those things that kind of come to the top. But I want to read the first 3 verses of Hebrews chapter 12. Therefore, he's referring back to chapter 11 and all those people that he mentioned. Since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. Now, the Apostle Paul had a vision of kind of what sports was like in his day. It's not a whole lot different from ours. They had huge arenas. Now, the games they played were a little bit different, but a lot of them were athletic events, running events, athletic competitions, track and field, what we would look at today. They had other events, gladiators would fight each other, and they'd fight lions and wild animals, and eventually they fought against Christians, put some of them to death. But when they came together for athletic games, Paul has in mind that stadium that you and I might see on Sunday or Saturday on TV. That large stadium with a huge cloud of witnesses who are watching God's people at work. You and I are the players. You and I are the people who are participating. And what Paul is trying to help folks understand is that we are not alone in our journey of faith today. He's talking about that cloud of witnesses. Now, I'm kind of waiting and watching, sometimes when you come up, it's 4th and 1 at Ohio Stadium, and Ohio State has the ball 4th and 1 on the Michigan 1-yard line, and they need a touchdown to win the game, and there's about 30 seconds left. And you'll see one of the players come out here and start getting the crowd excited. I wonder how many of us as Christians try to get the crowd pumped up because we are excited about serving Jesus. That's the picture that I have in my mind. I'm not going to tell you how that game ends. I don't know if there's any Michigan fans here or not, but I don't want to make you feel too good. Actually, that 4th and 1 with 1 yard, with one needing that score and a few seconds left hasn't been played out too much lately. So maybe Michigan will come back and start challenging Ohio State a little bit more. I hope not. But that's the picture that Paul has of you and I living our faith every day. That we are surrounded by that great crowd of witnesses who are cheering us on. And you and I might think, well, nobody else is paying any attention. Nobody even thinks about my life as a Christian. Well, yes, they do, because there are people. And the picture Paul tries to give, and I don't think Paul's trying to explain to us what heaven is like. He's just trying to give us a picture of encouragement from God's people. And it might be some of these people that we've talked about. It might be some family members. It might be folks who have gone before us in this church and in this community. It may be ancestors that go way back to the people that started this church when this was the farming community. Or further back to the people who blazed the trails and didn't have churches until they built them. Or way back to the men and women who were challenged with the question, do you serve God or do you serve Caesar? And if you answered that wrong, you felt their sword. Those are the people who Paul tries to help us envision as cheering us on. So I want to glean 3 things out of this passage, these 17 verses. We're not going to go into them all deeply. I want to pull 3 things off the top so that you and I can look at our lives as walking with Jesus. And remember what I said earlier. Those men and women of Hebrews chapter 11 were not great until they were used by God. And they weren't used by God to make them great. They were used by God because they were willing. First thing Paul says, this is an interesting one. He says, throw off everything that hinders us. Throw it off. Kind of puts me in mind of when you've been working outside. You get up early in the morning and go out and work, and it's cool, and then the sun comes up, and you start to get hot because you're doing manual labor, I know most of us are trying to avoid as much of it as possible. I've gotten good at that. But you know, it comes a point when it's just too hot and you throw that coat off. And then the next layer, and the next layer, you just throw it off. And that's the picture that Paul is giving us here. He says there's some dead weight in our lives. There's some dead weight in our lives. Now, there's two things he mentions here that he points out, and both of them are things that you and I probably struggle with. Not everything that drags us back away from God is sin. There are choices that you and I make that are not necessarily always right and wrong. Some of the choices you and I make are what's okay and what is best. A lot of times we settle for what's okay. It's good enough for me. It may not be good enough for God. God may challenge us for what's best. And so he says, throw off those things that are holding you back. If it's not the best, if it's not what will help us grow, then God says, put it aside. Throw it off. Take it like that jacket and throw it off. Because it is holding us back from being what God wants us to be. Now, sometimes sin is an issue. A lot of times that's an internal issue for each one of us. It tangles us up and pulls us back. It keeps us from being what God wants us to be, because not only does it keep us from following God, but it trips us up, and we'll find ourselves flat on our faces a lot, or going in the wrong direction. So Paul says, first thing we need to do is throw off those things that hold us back, and throw off the sin that so easily entangles. Now, he doesn't talk that way about the things that hinder us, but he uses that term about easily. I don't know about you, but that's been my experience in life. When sin comes along, it's pretty easy to jump right into it, isn't it? Other things I might debate about. That sin flashes itself at me. It's, I'll jump right into that because that looks attractive. Satan has his ways. It so easily besets us. So first thing Paul says for us, as we're out there on that playing field and the crowd of witnesses is watching us, he says, throw off the things that hold you back. Do away with the things that have us going in the wrong direction. Now just imagine, if you can, an athletic event. And football is what comes to mind, the stadiums and so on. How long do you think the coach is going to put that player in that runs the opposite direction? You give him the ball and he goes the other direction. How many times is he going to get in the game? Probably not more than that one time. That's what you and I do at times with sin. God gives us the ball and we say, I'm going back here because there's nobody here. There's a bunch of big, chunky linemen over here who want to tackle me, but there's nobody back here, so I'm going that direction. We run that way. Or picture a line or a ball carrier who lines up behind the quarterback. It's a cold day, and he's got his big heavy parka on. All those other linemen are out there in their bare arms, and here's it come this guy to carry the ball who kind of looks like the Michelin Man because he's got so much of a coat on. You see, those are the things that Paul's talking about. Throw those things off if they hinder us. Now, the coat's nice in its right place. On the sideline, you'll see the player come off the field and wrap up on those cold days. It's not going on the field. See, that's what Paul is talking about. Now, he's envisioning a different kind of athletic contest. But I think there's enough here that you and I can look at that and say, I don't need to wear my big bulky coat out in the competition. I need to put it aside. I don't need to run the wrong direction. I need to go in God's direction. Sin takes me in the wrong direction. Now, Paul goes into a lengthy discussion of a small word here. He starts with, in verse 1, 3-letter word. It says, let us run. I don't know too many people here who like to do that. I know Barry, used to like to run. I don't know if you still like to run. Somehow the older you get, running just isn't that much of an activity of choice, is it? But we can picture certain things when he talks about running. And Paul says, let us run with perseverance. Perseverance. I don't know how many of you have been in contests where you run, but any kind of running for me requires perseverance. after the first step. First step I can do. After that, it takes perseverance because you got to keep going and move the next foot and the next foot. But what Paul is talking about in these verses is really just drawn simply from that athletic event, that competition of running. And he likens it to our life as a Christian. Makes a lot of sense. And actually, I know you'll find this hard to believe, but I've run a few half marathons in my day. Couldn't tell it by looking at me. But there was a time when I could actually get one foot in front of the other and go 13 miles. But everything that Paul's talking about in these three verses is absolutely true of that kind of an event. And it's true of our life as Christians. He says, let us run with perseverance. I don't know what you think of as perseverance. Sometimes people get hung up on the idea of perseverance is just, you just sit there and tolerate it till it's over. You just sit there and put up with it till people stop. That's not the context of this word that Paul uses. He's talking about not just putting up with it, but overcoming. Getting to the finish line because that's your goal. Not, well, I can just sit here and take this. Patience that masters things. That's perseverance. Run with perseverance. And the next thing he says, and this is absolutely true. I've run a few half marathons in Indianapolis, Indiana, because I have family over there. And I'll come back to that in just a minute. But the halfway point is that Indianapolis Speedway. Do you know how long that is? That's 2.5 miles. You know, you run and you think, I'm at the halfway point. Well, you got 2.5 more miles to go before you go back. That's a big track. And last time I ran, it was like 30,000 people. So there were people all around me. And I started out running, and you know, I kind of look around, look at the people, and watch them. After about 30 feet, I'm starting to breathe heavy, getting tired, and I have to keep my eyes straight ahead. Because if I keep looking around me, what I see these, must be 75, 80-year-old little old ladies trucking right past me. You know, here I am, I'm not that old, I'm barely making it. Or I see some guy pushing a stroller with his kid in it, just leaving him in his dust. Or somebody runs by holding hands with their little, must be 8 or 10-year-old kid. And they just leave me in the dust. I have to keep my eyes straight ahead. Because if I don't look ahead, I get very, very discouraged. And one thing that I kind of like about Indianapolis, they got people all along the side of the street. They're cheering you on. They're encouraging you. They got music playing. They'll be out there doing all kinds of stupid, crazy things, trying to encourage you. And you know, the first mile or two, that's kind of neat. Get mile 3 and 4 and 5. I don't care anymore. I want to get there. I don't care what you're doing. I want to get done. I want to get done. So you have to keep your eyes fixed on the things that are straight ahead, not on the things beside us that pull us aside. That's what Paul's talking about. He's not talking about running, really. He's talking about life. How many times have you and I been pulled off of God's path because we start looking around us? We don't see where God wants us to go. We start looking at the things around us. That looks pretty good. Or, whoa, that looks bad. Better avoid that and I'll go this direction instead of that direction. See, Paul knew exactly what he was talking about. Keep our eyes fixed on Jesus. Because he's the one we want to follow. He's the one who has run this race ahead of us and knows what it's like. Now, I mentioned that when I run these races, sometimes it's family. And sometimes, you know, it's like, why in the world am I doing this? Well, when we get done, we all go to the H. They got big letters of the alphabet. We all go to the H because it's Hunsaker. I've got cousins, so we all go to the H. And then we have a little bit of family time. It's like, why didn't I just come and go to the H instead of doing that run? It'd be a lot less hassle. But there's something about it. And Barry, I know you've run some races. When you're done, it feels pretty good. Number one, you stopped, which helps a lot. Then you've accomplished something. You've gone the distance. You kept focused. And you went where you wanted to go. And that's exactly what Paul is talking about us in our lives as Christians. Are we going to go the distance? I've never yet not finished a race. I've been very slow. My goal is to finish, not finish with good time. That's what God calls us to do. Finish the race. We don't have to be the person at the front. Usually by the time, when I've run some of these races, it takes 20 or 30 minutes. By the time they say go, I'm going to clear the back. That's where the slow people are. And it takes 20 or 30 minutes to get to the starting line. And by that time, those guys from Kenya or wherever they are, they're like 2/3 done. You know, I'll start running out there and here they come, they're going back. That can be discouraging. But we're going to go. We're going to follow the course. We're going to complete the course. And we're going to enjoy the finish. That's what God calls us to in life. Sometimes we get distracted and we start looking at the wrong things, or we want to give up. And that's why Paul says, run with perseverance. There's not many races, and there's certainly no running I can do without perseverance. I've got to keep at it, or I will not get done. But he says, and here's something that really I can understand now from having done some of this. He says, from the joy set before him, he endured the cross. He didn't say for the joy of the cross. He said for the joy that was set before him. And I can understand just a little taste of that. Jesus went to the cross in our place, or the wrath of God that I should have felt for the joy of completing that race. For the joy of knowing he had been obedient to the Father, he had redeemed his creation and restored it and was giving it back to God. And the joy of that is what kept him going in that race. It's kind of like I said, you know, we go to the H. It feels so good to be done. It really does. Because, first of all, they'll give you water, and then they'll give you usually a banana, and there's all this food, they just keep moving you down the line. You can pick up, and because I'm kind of hungry after after going 13 miles, I don't know if I call it running. But there's a pleasure in having accomplished what you set out to do. And to some extent, that's what Paul's talking about. Jesus knew what God wanted him to do. He completed it. And it was the joy at the completion that made the journey worthwhile. I think Paul shares this with us, as he says at the end of verse 3, so that we will not grow weary and lose hope. Because Paul knows that you and I are facing challenges and struggles in life. He knows that Satan is pushing at us and poking and prodding, and things around us want to distract us. And he knows that sometimes we fall flat on our face. We'll get off course. We'll go the wrong direction. He wants us to know that completing the race is well worth the journey. Don't give up halfway there. Don't give up 2/3 of the way there. A half marathon is 13.1 miles, and the best part is the 0.1. For one thing, it's short, but it's also the end. Usually, the races I've run, they bring you down a path, and then you turn for that last 1/10 of a mile. And that's the fastest 1/10 I run. You know, you'd think after 13 miles, I'd be really tired. And I always ask myself, well, why am I feel like I can run so fast? I should really be tired. I must have been sandbagging back there when those little old ladies were passing me. But, you know, you see the finish line. You want to, because you know that what is awaiting you is not only the sense of accomplishment, but other people coming around and talking about their race and encouraging. That's what God is telling us to do, so that we will not grow weary and lose heart. You know, I don't know what you're facing in your life. I don't know what struggles you're dealing with, but I do know that God says, don't give up. Run with perseverance the race that is before us. Now, the third piece I want to pull off the top of these verses is the rest from verse 4 to verse 17. And I'm not going to read all of it, I want to tell you a little bit about it. If you've got your Bibles, you can read through it and give you something to do if you're tired of listening to me. He says, endure hardship as discipline. Endure hardship as discipline. There's 2 words in there I don't like. Actually 3, endure. I can deal with that one. He talks about hardship. He talks about discipline. Hardship. What's hardship? Every one of us could probably point to hardships in our lives, even if we can't think of them off the top of our head. It might be something physical, it might be something medical, it might be something financial, it might be something personal, it might be family, it might just be our job, it could be just about anything. Paul challenges us to take a perspective on hardship. That perspective is not one that comes natural. When something goes wrong, one of the first things you want to do is just sit down and give up, isn't it? Well, I guess I don't have to do that. Especially if it's something I don't want to do. If I know I'm not supposed to, I don't want to do something. If Deb says, hey, you need to do this while I'm at work today, and I can't find the right tool, well, I can't do that. I don't try very hard. Some of you have seen that before too, huh? Yeah, well, I tried. I couldn't find the tool. Well, usually she'll come back and say, it's right here. Oh, I didn't look there. Or she knows me well enough. Yeah, I looked there 3 times and didn't see it. She knows me well enough to know, yeah, that's probably true. But now you have to go do it. But we all face hardships of many different kinds. And what Paul's not talking about, we're not going to face hardship. He's not saying just blow it off. He says take a perspective on the hardships that life brings to us that God takes. And here's that second word that we don't like. It's discipline. It says take that as discipline. Discipline. Now that's not necessarily a popular word because in our educational field, and if you work in government like I do, discipline is a bad thing. Right? That's what you tell somebody. Look, if you can't get your job done, I'm going to have to start doing formal discipline. Well, that's a bad word. I mean, we'll take out a piece of paper, start writing stuff down. I get enough of that, I can say, well, I'll give you 10 days off without pay. If I have to keep doing that, I can say, you're fired. And then we go to State Personnel Board of Review and argue it out. And, it's going to take me 2 years. And then they might say, you get to come back. I have to pay you back pay. So what good that discipline do? Discipline is not always a bad thing. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it's a sign of trouble. Then sometimes it's a tool that can be used. Certainly as parents, we've used discipline. And I will not ask anybody to share, but I can guess from looking at some of you that in your younger days, your parents probably practiced discipline too. Sometimes you step out of line and you got to get put back in line. That's the negative side of discipline that we tend to push out to the front because that's how we use it. But discipline has another side. It has a learning side. And that's the side I think Paul really wants us to look at. Yes, sometimes God disciplines us as sons. When we get off track, when we start looking at other things around, God kind of swats us once in a while and says, hey, get back the right way. Get back on track. God does that sometimes. And if we don't listen, he might swat a little harder. But much of God's discipline is not meant to be negative and, oh, you're in trouble. Much of God's discipline is about learning, and training, and growing. I'm going to guess that just about everyone here has improved their skills in some area over time. How did you do that? Did you open a book and look at the pictures and say, hey, I'm a brain surgeon? I don't think anybody would come to me for brain surgery if I said, yeah, I looked at pictures in a book. I got on the internet. And I saw a YouTube video, and now I can do brain surgery. Nobody's going to show up at my door and have their brain worked on. Or a mechanic who wants to take their car to somebody and says, yeah, well, I can't find something, I just get on YouTube and Don't tell me how to do it. Now, I might do that myself. I don't want to take it to somebody who will pay $100 an hour. You got to know that stuff. He should have had the discipline to learn it. See, there are things that we learn, and this is what Paul's really wanting us to focus on. Yes, God does at times correct us. But much of his discipline is trying to train us to grow. It's discipline with a learning benefit. It's practice about what's good for me. And I'm going to guess that many of our careers are the result of us practicing discipline. It may have been to study. It may have been to stay the course those late nights. It may have been to show up to work the next day after yesterday was just a terrible day. That requires discipline on our part because we know we're going to learn from that and it's going to make us better. You know, there are some things that don't require a lot of discipline in life. There are other things that do. We've got a nice garden started at home. There's some tomato plants there. I even watered some of them. I didn't put them in the ground, but I watered some of them. I don't like tomatoes. We could have some real big beefy tomatoes and you could set them on the table in front of me and I would just sit there and look at them. Dad doesn't have to worry about me grabbing one and starting to slice it or pick it up and start eating it. You don't have to worry about me touching her tomatoes. Doesn't take any discipline on my part to ignore a tomato. Now, I know there's some of you out there that will just grab it right now and start eating it. Carmen was that way. I could bring her tomatoes, she would dive right into them. Now, you put a bowl of peanut M&Ms in front of me. If I'm going to stay out of them, it requires extreme discipline. Because I like chocolate. And peanut M&Ms are a good example of chocolate. And you'll see me starting to, you put it in front of me and say, don't eat those. I'm not going to listen to you. Well, I don't know. I might if I have some good reason. Somebody's watching me, or maybe I'm not going to run another half marathon right now, so I don't have to worry about that. You know, you see the difference? There are some things in life that to you are not going to require your discipline, any discipline for you to deal with. Me? God may be smacking me upside the head saying, quit looking at that. Get your eyes focused where they need to be. There are things in my life that I might look at like tomatoes, say, that doesn't tempt me one bit. And you may struggle with it. Paul talks about this over and over and over. And we need to encourage one another. And that's something we can do when we gather weekly. Sometimes it's just the presence. Your presence here is encouraging to people and telling others that, you know what, they had a rough week and they're here to honor God. That's discipline. That's discipline. We try to teach that to our kids. Don't know what you're going to do on Saturday night, but if you live in our house, guess where you're going to be Sunday morning? It's like, oh, we got to go to Sunday? Yeah. Well, I'm getting in like, well, that don't matter. You don't have to. It's discipline, helping us learn the things that benefit us. All this is wrapped up in verse 17, and I want to end with this, because at the end, he talks about Esau. And there's a real sad ending to that story, but he says, he could not change what he had done. And you can read about Esau, some in chapter 11, where he gave away that which should have been the most important to him. For what? A bowl of porridge? It wasn't even peanut M&Ms. A bowl of porridge. But he was hungry. And Jacob had fixed a nice meal. And he said, I don't care about that. As he got older, and he went and saw his father, and he begged and pleaded, and he shed tears for his birthright, but it had already been given away. He sold it. It wasn't important to him at the time. And those are sad words. He could not change what he had done. I don't know where your life is at. I do know this, that one of these days, you and I can be in that great cloud of witnesses who are up there encouraging others to continue to be faithful. can you look around and see that cloud of witnesses and say, oh, look, that's me? Will that be you? Will that be me? One of these days, we can be there. Will we be there? That's when we come back to where Paul is telling us to throw off the things that can hinder us, to run with perseverance that race, and to endure hardship. Not as something we just have to tolerate in life, but as discipline that can make us stronger in being who God wants us to be. And if you're here this morning and you don't know whether or not you're going to be in that great cloud of witnesses, it's time to start that journey. It's time to give your life to Christ, to be baptized into Him, and become a part of the family of God. Knowing that one of these days you'll be sitting in that stadium waiting on Ohio State to score that winning touchdown against that other team up north. Knowing that we will be cheering on God's people. And remembering that the people who were sitting in that great stadium at one time, they were not champions before God called them. They became champions because they were obedient to God. So I'm going to ask Terry to come and lead us in a hymn of invitation. If you've got a decision you'd like to make today, I encourage you to come.
We're standing and using hymn number 515. 515.
Jesus came into my heart. Let the joy